people like Rasmiya Aude started going out to the UN testifying to being raped in front of her father, to her father being tortured and forced to have sexual intercourse with her, there were widespread condemnations. What Israel did after that is that it created a legal framework to house sexualized torture and violence, to put it within boundaries that are permissible.
Israel has had the stalwart support of the American public for decades, but it's lost that. Now the American public is sick of what Israel's doing. That's both Jewish public and non-Jewish public. It's across the board, especially the young people in America. They're really disgusted with American support for this kind of murderous state. And the United States can't back Israel in this. That's proved by the complete failure and debacle of this war on Iran, which Trump will continue because he's inconsequential. He loves to dominate, but he doesn't dominate anything. He goes along and he doesn't know how to stop any of this, but none of this works. Israel is not going to be, quote, greater Israel. Israel is not going to rule over millions of Palestinian people in some kind of genocidal state. This is coming to an end.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone can download the report on predatorystate.org. It's almost 200 pages. It's essentially a chronological, history of the use of sexualized violence and gendered violence against Palestinians since the beginning, or since the beginning of the Nakba, since the establishment of Israel, until as late as April 2026. So, with all this evidence and, including testimonies, but also a few case studies through which we analyze, for example, the use of AI to enact gendered violence, blackmail, honey traps, and coercion, with the creation of false relationships with Palestinians to infiltrate political groups and communities, all the way to the subjugation of Palestinians to sexualized torture and rape and humiliation. Our analysis is that Israel is committing this sort of violence, sexualized and gendered violence, with genocidal intent. The methods of sexualized violence that we analyze constitute a pattern that is clearly derived from a coordinated policy and a mandate. So it's not a random or incidental
a few bad apples.
Exactly. It's not, the lone act of a cartoonishly evil soldier or settler. It's systematic, and it's carried out with intent and consistency that can only be a result of protocols that are mandated and institutionalized within this settler colony, and also ingrained within the culture that sustains it. The purpose of the sexualized or the purpose of the enactment of this violence is to inflict collective terror on Palestinians. Even if the crime is committed on an individual, so a certain Palestinian prisoner is sexually tortured, for example, the intent is to inflict harm on the entire Palestinian nation because of the sheer depravity of these acts, their breadth and the scope of this torture and violence that this report reveals. Can only be seen as an attempt to eliminate Palestinians through ethnic cleansing and mass murder, with explicit articulations of intent to kill. And so, importantly, now that for the past 3 years we've been saying that Israel has been committing genocide against the Palestinian people, using these legal frameworks within, international law, using the definitions of international law. It's important to utilize also and to say that sexualized violence and torture and gendered violence are both being carried out with genocidal intent, and they are both part of this genocidal crime. The final finding is that there's been a clear acceleration of sexualized violence since the appointment of Ben Gvir as the Minister of National Security in 2022. And several reports have come out, testimonies even before the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, that indicate beyond any doubt, beyond attempts to deny, even though I'm not really seeing any attempts to deny from the Israeli population or state. In fact, they're actively celebrating it and inciting rape. But beyond any attempts to doubt this evidence, it proves that sexualized violence is part of a larger arsenal of strategies that are used to destroy the Palestinian people, used to attack Palestinian peoplehood, livelihood, and futurity on Palestinian land.
انتقلت لسجن مجده بعد 19 يوم، وكل ما حدث معي هو في أول يوم دخولي لسجن مجده، أو قدرت إني أنا أحدد إنه هم من 4 ل 6 أشخاص، ولما رموني على الأرض وأنا لسه يعني مش شايف إشي، نزعوا البنطلون ونزعوا البوكسر وقالوا لي يلا على ركبك على ركبك على ركبك. بدأوا بالضرب على كل أنحاء جسمي وبدون يعني خطوط حمراء. شعرت إني أنا قريب من الموت، يعني الألم شديد جدا. فكنت بنتظر شو المرحلة القادمة بعد الضرب، ليش نجلحوا لي البنطلون؟ شعرت إنه في إشي قاعد بيحاول يدخل في منطقة المستقيم، بس الإشي صلب، يعني مش إنسان بيحاولوا يدخلوا إشي في منطقة. لا شعوريا أنا كإنسان حاولت إني أمنع، أشد على حالي أمنع الإشي هذا يدخل في منطقة المستقيم. تعرضت لألم مضاعف، ففلتت، خلص استسلمت لهذا الموضوع، وشعرت انهم سكبوا على مؤخرتي شيء لزج ما عرفت شو هو، مع تحريك، مع التواء، مع حركات بتسبب ألم أكثر مضاعف للدخول في منطقة المستقيم. شو بدي أعمل؟ مش عارف شو بدي أعمل. أنا ما كنت أصرخ، ولكن كنت أصدر أصوات يعني إنه بتألم، لحد إنه في حدا مد إيده من تحت ومسك المحاشم أو الخصاوي وضغط عليهم بشكل عنيف جدا. هون أنا صرخت صوت ما بعرف هو طلع برا مجده ولا ما طلع، وبدأ يشد في القضيب كمان ألم إضافي على الألم اللي هو بشد على الخصاوي، مع عملية الاغتصاب إدخال وإخراج. أنا تمنيت إني خلص يعني خلص أفارق الحياة في هاي اللحظة، لأنه مش قادر. تجربتي أنا كسامي نقطة في بحر من تجارب كثير أسرى تعرضوا لأبشع من اللي أنا تعرضت له، وتحديدا أسرى قطاع غزة. يعني أنا بهاي الطريقة خرجت من الحالة النفسية اللي أنا كنت بعاني منها، إنه أقارن اللي تعرضت له مع اللي تعرض له الكباري اللي بخرف فيي.
We all witnessed an IDF gang rape of a Palestinian hostage. There was a group of IDF soldiers who were caught on surveillance footage. This is a video I watched. This is a video that many people have seen themselves. The gang rape happens, okay? The Palestinian man who suffered that sexual abuse had internal injuries that were so bad that he had to be in the hospital for weeks upon weeks, okay? They used objects to rape him anally. I mean, it was one of the most horrific things I've ever witnessed myself. And you know what happened, Pierce, after there was some indication that maybe, just maybe, these IDF soldiers would suffer some punishment for what they did? There were protests in Israel. There was rage over the notion that they would ever suffer any consequences for what they did. And later, they were made to be television stars. They were brought on interview shows, celebrated. There is a sickness in the society right now.
And so we use sexualized violence as an umbrella term to encompass all of these types of violence. So to encompass sexual humiliation that can take the form of, for example, forcing prisoners to undress in front of each other, forcing prisoners to wear underwear that does not fit them properly, specifically women prisoners, all the way to being raped by a group of Israeli soldiers as an individual alone or in front of other prisoners, and you know, also, of course, as we've all seen, the photos of Israeli soldiers after they invade the homes of Palestinians, taking pictures of with lingerie and sort of weaponizing intimacy and sexuality against the Palestinian people in an attempt to humiliate them. And so the use of sexualized violence is supposed to be was intentional, to sort of, you know, act as an umbrella term that could, you know, have all of these forms of violence fall, you know, underneath it.
Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on July 17th, 2026. In recent months, Israel has been rocked by a massive ritual child sexual abuse scandal. The scandal involves the ritual sexual abuse and torture of children as young as 3 years. The victims were abused and tormented in many of these cases by members of their own family. And up on the screen, I'm showing you the headline from an article published in May of this year by the investigative news outlet Shomerim, the Center for Media and Democracy in Israel. According to Inbal Brenner, who was quoted in this article, and he is the chairperson of the Israeli Society for Sexual Trauma Treatment and Prevention, the perpetrators of these heinous crimes, quote, in quite a few cases were high status community members. They either held respected religious or spiritual authority like a rabbi or occupied other influential prominent positions. And elsewhere in this article, another mental health expert in Israel is quoted as saying that at least one of the perpetrators was a judge and numerous of them were doctors. I repeat, medical doctors. Now, if your only source of information about world events was the Western corporate media, then almost certainly you would know nothing about this scandal because the Western corporate media predictably have avoided the scandal like the plague.
It was foundational, right? Ethnic cleansing was always part of the plan. And kind of likewise, some people I'm sure think, oh, this sexual torture that we're seeing now, this sexualized violence, this is something new. When, as your report outlines, this sexualized violence was foundational as well, used to ethnically cleanse.
So, I mean, the report begins with testimonies and evidence from 1948. Evidence that was collected from published diaries of the early Jewish settlers who formed the armed gangs and militias that terrorized Palestinians and depopulated our villages using threats of rape, but also importantly enacting rape against Palestinians. What's really important to notice, or one of the patterns that we noticed while looking at this evidence and compiling it, is that sexual slavery was an important strategy for these early Zionist gangs and militias that were invading Palestinian towns and depopulating them. This included things like gang rape and the kidnapping of Palestinian girls, threats to kidnap them, threats to rape them, but also actual kidnapping and gang rape of girls and women in an attempt to instill fear in Palestinians at the time and force them to flee their villages. You would think that a society and a state that seem to be 100% aligned on alleging that Israeli women were systemically raped by Palestinians on October 7, and also entirely intent on using that hoax as one of the justifications for this genocide in Gaza, and further annexation of Palestinian land in the West Bank and Jerusalem. You would think that the state and its population would not be so eager to jump on the opportunity to rally in favor of rape and torture of Palestinian prisoners in particular, but Palestinians in general. You would think they would not so, brazenly incite or celebrate rape as a strategy.
Right.
And yet here we are, and that can only mean one thing. It can only indicate one thing, which is that this is a settler society and a colony that was built and continues to be sustained by a depraved culture that is entirely based on torture, whether sexualized or not. It's entirely based on the oppression and exploitation of Palestinians and their land. And this is not only allowed to happen, it doesn't only slip through the cracks, it's the very foundation upon which the society and state were established.
Right. Yeah, and you have also, the Knesset member saying that it's legitimate to insert sticks into people's rectums.
In the Knesset, which is essentially the Congress, an exchange took place. I'm going to let you hear the exchange so that you don't think that I have somehow inflated what happened, that I'm engaging in some kind of hyperbole. I don't want you to think that. So I'm going to show you, and I put Hebrew subtitles here. I'm going to show you exactly what was said. Check this out.
אני לא יודע אם יודעים, אבל יש אירוע כרגע בשדה תימן, שמשטרה צבאית הגיעו לעצור חיילים ששמרו על מחבלי נוח'בה. טרלול שהמדינה שלנו נכנסת אליו סביב הסיפור הזה הוא מטורף וצריך להפסיק אותו. ואני חושב שצריך פה לתת דוגמה אישית, ואני אומר עכשיו, ואני קורא לחברי הקואליציה לעשות כמוני, אני קם ואני יוצא מפה, ואני לא הולך להצביע יותר על שום דבר, עד שהסיפור הזה והטרלול הזה, שיש מי שבפרקליטות חושב שאפשר לבוא ולעצור חיילים על דברים שעושים למחבלי נוח'בה, לא נגמר. להמשיך כרגיל.
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם, זה לגיטימי?
כן, אם הוא נוח'בה, הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל. הכל.
זה מה שרציתי.
הכל, האנשים האלה, אתה יודע מה עשו?
אוקיי.
טוב.
יש דברים שלא עושים.
All I can say is, wow. When he asked if it was okay to literally stick a stick in someone's rectum, that seemed like a pretty easy interview moment. You just say no. He literally asked a member of the Knesset, or a member of the Knesset literally argued for Israeli soldiers' right to rape Palestinians and sodomize them with a stick. I wish I could tell you that this was exceptional. I wish I could tell you that this was so rare and extremist that it doesn't merit kind of any kind of analysis. But the fact is, this is a debate that's actually happening inside of the Israeli government. 10 Israeli soldiers were detained after they were accused of gang raping a Palestinian. And security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, a right-wing extremist and convicted person who's been convicted for all kinds of crimes, called the suspected, I shouldn't say all kinds of crimes, let me be accurate, a particular crime, but he is guilty of all kinds of crimes. Anyway, Itamar Ben-Gvir called the suspected rapists heroes. Now, again, he's a security minister, and he is one of the most influential voices in Netanyahu's cabinet. He said that the people who raped Palestinians, who took a stick and sodomized them, while other elected officials, Gvir called them heroes, other elected officials took part in violent protests outside the Tiemann Center, the Diamond Detention Center, which is also known by locals as a torture site. So you have some liberal Zionists out there who are like, hey, this is wrong. There's still liberal Zionists. They still ultimately believe in an apartheid state, an ethno state. So let's not clap too loud for them. But there is some pushback. But you have a huge swath of the Israeli citizenry, particularly the right wing, who think that Palestinians are not human beings. They believe that Palestinians are entitled or do whatever happens to them. Basically, if you're Palestinian and you get raped, if you're Palestinian and you get assaulted, if you're Palestinian and you get shot by the IOF, that somehow you deserved it. The idea is that Palestinians aren't full human beings. The idea here is that Palestinians aren't worthy. They don't merit the type of protection and safety and dignity that other people around the world deserve. The fact that this is a conversation happening is shameful. I remember after October 7th, when the narrative was that Hamas was just out here raping villages of Israelis and beheading villages of babies, right? And the world was outraged by it. And the world should be outraged at that claim. Again, a claim. All those beheaded babies never seem to show up, and the evidence of mass rapes, that never showed up. Again, I'm not saying that no one was assaulted. I'm not saying no one was harmed. But the allegations were inflated for sure. But when those announcements came out, people were reasonably, and I think almost universally, outraged. How dare someone harm somebody in that way? This is wrong. But when it comes to Palestinians, that's not the case. It's not happening in the Knesset. And unfortunately, the global community isn't responding to me with as much outrage and disgust as they should, because this is happening right now in Israel. People are talking about Palestinians as barbaric, Palestinians as prone to violence, Palestinians as stubborn and all these things. Let's take those Orientalist, white supremacist frameworks away and just look at what's happening. Palestinians are catching hell everywhere, not just in Gaza, in the West Bank, inside of Israel, in the Golan, in the Sinai, wherever you at, around diaspora.
Israel has declared that they plan to sue the New York Times over Nicholas Kristof's report on the sexual abuse of Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons. Now, Kristof's column, for those of you who somehow missed it, alleged a pattern of widespread Israeli sexual violence against men, women, and even children by soldiers, settlers, interrogators in the Shin Bet Internal Security Agency, and above all, prison guards. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu weighed in on this as well, saying, "Today I instructed my legal advisors to consider the harshest legal action against the New York Times and Nicholas Kristof. You're a war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu. You are literally wanted. There's a warrant out for your arrest by the International Criminal Court. You're a war criminal. You have slaughtered so many people, including journalists, doctors, aid workers, emergency workers. Like, the idea that this guy has a moral high ground on literally anything is laughable." But generally speaking, foreign countries don't have legal standing in defamation suits in the United States. And besides which, defamation suits in the United States between two people living in the United States, incredibly difficult to win. There's no indication that Kristof did anything to defame Israel. Israel defames itself every single day by their own actions. I actually think that it would be fantastic, absolutely fantastic, if some way, somehow, this defamation suit goes to court. Because if it goes through a typical discovery process, oof, I jump in it. I would love it. I would absolutely love it. Because when you consider what Israelis say in Israel openly, candidly, on broadcast television, can you imagine what they're willing to say behind the scenes? Private emails, text messages, things like that. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would be like for the New York Times in this lawsuit to get footage, surveillance footage from these prisons where these Palestinian detainees are being raped? I say that they move forward with this lawsuit. I don't know if they're able to actually do it, but if they are, that could actually be very enlightening for the American people.
You have these rapists becoming like celebrities on like
Yeah.
late night television. You have comedians making jokes about dog rape.
بطلب انه تظل صوتي مش خوف. انا مش خايف من حدا، انا خايف على اولادي. في يوم من الايام حدا يعيرهم انه انت اللي ابوك عمل فيه كلب، مجرد انه وضعت اجرك في سجن عقر انت هان تركت خلفك انسانيتك الحقيقيه. الحدث الاعظم واللي هذا اللقاء هو مقام علشانه كان بتاريخ 15/1. فاخذوني على الحمام طبعا مع ضرب شديد وعنيف. انا هون صرت في حاله نصف سجود على ركبي، مؤخرتي ظاهره واعضائي الحساسه ظاهره برضه من الخلف. تم ضربي على اعضائي الحساسه من الخلف. جندي كان واقف صار يضرب فيه برجلي، يعني انا مش قادر احدد كان الالم في راسي اللي داعس على راسي كان ضابطه، ولا اللي بده يخلع كتافي ولا هو اللي بيضربني من تحت. بعدين سمعت، او مش سمعت، شعرت في الانفاس سخنه، شعرت الانفاس سخنه على مؤخرتي. بعدين سمعت تبع الكلب، كنت انا يعني بنساه صوته من قبل، فبيحكي مع الكلب بألفاظ يعني أنا ما فهمت غير كلمة ميسي، وكأنه الكلب اسمه ميسي وطلب منه بلغة بينهم الاثنين إنه يعمل إشي. فبتفاجئ الكلب إنه بيركبني ويبدأ بمجامعتي كمجامعة أنثى من جنسه. شعرت بعضو الكلب وهو لامس جسمي، وشعرت في إيديه وهن ماسكت لي من ظهري، وشعرت في لعابه وهو بينزل علي. وانا بصرخ وبحكي له لا مشان الله يعني، وبحاول اشد على حالي حتى ما يتمكن مني الكلب. استمر الحدث تقريبا 3 إلى 4 دقائق هذا الامر، ونتيجة صراخي نزلوا في ضرب بالعصي انه ليش بصوت وليش بصرخ، لاني ازعجت جناب الكلب. انا حالي من 11,000 موجودة في السجون، حالي واحدة وال11,000 متشابهات هي كلبون.
Let's talk a little bit about what you can hear if you're living in Israel and watching their entertainment and their news programs, especially on, and unsurprisingly, on Israel's Channel 14. Let's take a look at that.
הגעת עם נשק, הגעת עם כלב, מי זה הכלב הזה? הכלב הזה זה ג'אנגו, איתי בכל פעילות, איתי במילואים. ג'אנגו? היה בעזה. כלב גבעות, יש לומר. ככה אמא שלי קוראת לי אגב, ג'אנגו. כן, טיפל קצת בנוח'בות בסתימן, עשה הרבה. תגיד דברים ש... קיצור, אותו מג"ד.
So the host asks the soldier, the IDF soldier, about his dog, Django, and that the dog took care of some prisoners at the notorious Setiman prison, and that they did a lot, that the dogs did a lot. They're bragging about the dog rape on Channel 14. They're bragging about it. An IDF soldier is on Channel 14 in Israel freaking bragging about it. So I'd like to ask Netanyahu, who are you going to sue, bitch? For defamation? You're going to go after that IDF soldier for saying that, the canines are used to take care of the Palestinians? Freaking monsters, man. Freaking monsters. And then they have the audacity to point to people like us and act like we're the bad guys? Oh, they're anti-Semitic. Are we? Or do we care about humanity? This has nothing to do with Judaism. This has to do with human decency. This has to do with Israel's crimes against humanity. That's what this has to do with. And even some comedians are, doing crowd work that involves poking fun at prison rape. Let's look at that example.
There are people who have done what? And what do you say? You are sitting in the dark. What is the absolute worst thing you've done to them? Come on now, come on. Make us blush just a little bit.
I exercise my right to remain silent.
That is really quite nice. I love you. Listen. That is wonderful. The entire audience, those guilty of crimes against humanity, are all applauding. Wonderful. What else? And they regret it and say, oh, no, I've seen enough. We need to move on to other things. Do they apologize or something? What do I think? I don't know what you did. If his mouth is sealed and he can't speak, then he can just go, oh, I don't know what you did. Do they also choose, like, can you only with a broomstick? They're like asking that.
Yeah, real funny. There's a sickness in the society there. That wasn't funny. That was just joking around about something that everyone seems to acknowledge is happening. And what's happening is a crime. What's happening is beyond immoral, beyond. And Nick Kristof is the bad guy because he's reporting on it. Amazing. Really incredible stuff.
There is a famous case, very well substantiated by documentation, of a Palestinian girl of the age of 12 that was abducted by Israeli soldiers and kept for 3 days as a sex slave and was gang raped before she was murdered. And that shows that this brutality is not beyond Israeli soldiers or before that Zionist troops. And as we know from experience of women in the occupied West Bank and before that in the occupied Gaza Strip, unfortunately this kind of sexual criminal or crimes of rape and sexual harassment continued from 1948 until today.
I wanted to bring up one of the really disturbing examples. I saw fit to remove her from the world is the title of this article in Haaretz. Newly revealed documents obtained by Haaretz tell the long hidden story of what Ben Gurion described as a quote unquote horrific atrocity. In August 1949, an IDF unit caught a Bedouin girl, held her captive in a Negev outpost, gang raped her, executed her at the order of the platoon commander, and buried her in a shallow grave in the desert. So this is in 2003, a seal was lifted on the personal diary of Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, and other classified Israeli military documents. Reporting on the newly declassified materials, Haaretz published a story on the August 1949 abduction of a teenage Bedouin Palestinian girl from the Nakab, who was forced into sexual enslavement and gang raped by soldiers at the Nirim military outpost before she was killed and buried. Ben Gurion's August 22nd, 1949 diary entry shows that the highest ranks were aware of this case. He states it was decided and carried out. They washed her, cut her hair, raped her, and killed her. Testimonies from the 20 soldiers involved in the assault indicate that the order came from the platoon commander, identified only as Moshe. After the girl's abduction, Moshe gave his soldiers a speech on the importance of Zionism and their contributions to the formation of the new state. He concluded his speech by giving his soldiers two options regarding their captive. She was either to become a kitchen worker or their sex slave. In reply, the soldiers chanted, "We want to F-U-C-K." Moshe then arranged a 3-day rape schedule for soldiers from 3 squads to take turns raping her. After the first night of enduring the gang rape and physical assault, the girl fell unconscious. The following morning, she resisted her assailants and was in turn executed and buried on Moshe's orders. So can you tell us more about this incident and the context, how and why this is not an isolated incident?
This is a diary entry that was declassified and allowed to enter the public imagination and public discourse. You can imagine what exists that is still classified, what exists that is still hidden in Israeli archives. This is, this diary entry, we included it because it's a microcosm, really, or one example of the use of sexualized torture and this violence during the early days of the Nakba. I mean, this one is from 1949, but there's a lot of evidence from the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948. A lot of survivors at the time came out with testimonies about how sexualized violence was being used against them to force them to flee their homes. Specifically, Zionist militias that later were then, instituted and mandated as the IDF. Zionist militias using loudspeakers, driving through villages with threats of rape, screaming threats of rape with these loudspeakers. There was a specific period after the 80s towards the 90s and the early 2000s where you start seeing less incidents of sexualized torture and violence in prisons, there's, many reasons. One of them is that, there's this sort of relationship between the use of sexualized torture and violence within prisons and the strength of the prisoners movement inside these prisons. But also it's because after worldwide and international condemnation of these tactics and strategies, that's just one thing I wanted to mention about certain periods where you see gaps in testimonies, or perhaps a decrease in the frequency or intensity of sexualized violence. It's not so much that it stopped happening or that it decreased in intensity or frequency all the time. It's more so that it started being allowed within a specific quota.
Right.
Torture was actually institutionalized and used as a legitimate strategy in interrogations within Israeli law. I mean, of course, for our findings, extremely important because it illustrates a methodological utilization of sexualized violence against Palestinians.
You've spoken publicly about being beaten and sexually assaulted by Israeli men in that container. I want to give you a space to share your experience, and what do you want people to understand about what happened to you?
It felt like, so when I was dragged onto the prison boat and cable tied behind my back and shackled on my ankles and pushed down, they said my name. And they didn't say anyone else's name that was on my boat. So, yeah, I really had the fear immediately that they knew who I was and that the punishment might be escalated because I'd be punished for daring to come back a second time. They used water as means of torture. So when I was on I was lying down, my hands were behind my back and I couldn't move my legs, and different bodies are sort of getting sardined and slammed onto you. They started to put a lot of water under my face, and every time I tried to get away from it, I'd get slapped. And I remember like being in maybe like a year 8 chemistry course, and something about like, you can actually drown in a teaspoon of water, and that was much more than that. So I was gasping for breath, and I did think that I was going to drown. Then I was taken away, I was processed, they look at your passport, they take a photograph of you. There's a lot of insults around, you're a baby killer, you're a Jew hater, you're an Arab lover, why are you in Israel, why are you coming back? And if you dare to say, which I did, I said, well, I wasn't planning on coming to Israel. I don't even recognise that Israel has the right to exist. I've come to deliver aid to occupied Palestine. That's not really the wisest thing to say.
Wow, okay.
But it's also the correct and the moral thing to remind them of. Yeah. Then I was taken to what we later ended up calling like a torture tunnel. It was a shipping container. There was an open door, but it was a dark room. There was 5 Israeli soldiers in there. I could see the silhouettes of them. The largest man was the one who wrenched down my trousers and my underpants and raped me from behind. While this is happening, you're never allowed to walk with dignity with your head held high. They put their hand behind your neck almost so that you're getting strangled, and your head is forced so far down that your head is sort of by your knees. So you are in the most vulnerable position. You can't move your hands or your legs. You're getting jostled. I got slapped. I got punched in the face. Again, they said, welcome to Israel. Are you enjoying this now? I don't know if that was half an hour. I don't know if that was 5 minutes. It was the longest experience of my life. Then I was thrown out through another door. I was like number 83 on my wristband, and my daughter Isla ran up to me. And my biggest fear, the whole flotilla, even though she is 24 and she is a really moral and a young woman of conscience, my real fear was what the Israeli occupation forces would do to her. So when she ran towards me and hugged me, and I just said, Isla, you know, are you okay? What did they do to you? And she said, Mum, I'm number 2. I'm number 2 on my wristband.
No one can say they didn't know. The Israelis could not have made it clearer to us what they were doing in their rhetoric, social media they were posting, and what their own media was saying, that this was an exercise in ethnic cleansing, quite possibly an exercise in genocide. They were making it abundantly clear to us. And if we are ignorant, we are willfully ignorant. When people tell you who they are, believe them, and the Israelis have certainly told us who they are.
Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, the architect of a horrific genocide against the Palestinian people. He is responsible for the killing of more than 73,000 people, for the maiming of tens of thousands of children as those who survive undergo amputation without anesthesia, for the targeting of neonatal hospitals and maternity care centers, denying newborns even the chance to live, for the countless people he starved as he blocked food and humanitarian aid from reaching them, for the gunning down of hundreds of aid workers and journalists. And just last month, the UN confirmed that Palestinian children continue to be deliberately targeted and killed by Israeli armed forces, more than 8 months after the so-called ceasefire. The list goes on and on, all as we, as Americans, pay for the bombs that do the killing. There is a reason the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest. As human beings, we have spent generations building a shared understanding that there are crimes so grave, they offend all of humanity. Anyone, with their eyes, with their heart, with their conscience, should recognize the devastation he has wrought and understand that he belongs before a court of law. As I've said, I agree with the ICC that Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested and tried for his crimes, as I do for anyone else charged by the ICC. While we cannot end the genocide on our own, we can decide whether our silence will become another weapon, and we can examine every tool we have to defend the humanity and dignity of all people.
Free Palestine! Sitting in
Andy Burnham seems to have been getting a bit of a bump in the polls. If he is seen to be supporting Israel and not stopping the flow of weapons, then he's going to lose that support, isn't he? Because people hope that he is representing Palestine in a better way.
I think he would lose that bounce extremely quickly, because this would be the clearest symbol, wouldn't it? That it is words but no actions. If he is presiding over a scene like this, where people are being arrested for terrorism just for trying to speak up about what's happening in Palestine, and that's all good with Andy Burnham, we know it's just words. And it'll be the same old, and he will be the next Prime Minister out the door.
Shame! You were in breach of your code of conduct.
Well, what we lost is got even worse and worse and worse. and our complicity is so clear, and all the evidence of what is happening. And now it's even worse about what is happening in the West Bank and what is happening in Lebanon. And I'm afraid that Andy Burnham hasn't said a word about, he hasn't used the G word, he hasn't talked about the genocide, he hasn't talked yet about our arming of Israel. What they're doing to Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons, the bestiality, the cruelty, what they're doing, the way they're murdering health workers, murdering journalists, targeting children, killing babies. We are absolutely in it, and our justice system is no longer credible. I'm a barrister, I'm 94 years old. I'm horrified to see how we no longer have an independent justice system. I think we're living in a police state. Here they all are, the police. I wish some of the police would think about, are they obeying orders that are illegal under international law?
Is supporting this criminal behaviour, absolutely supporting it. Why? Why is this government so utterly committed to the interests of Israel? Why is that so?
Saving lives is not terrorism.
No.
Three, two, one, left.
Move out of the way! Excuse me, mate, excuse me. Thank you. Mate, you can stand back there and do it, yeah? Free Palestine!